Hi there, welcome to Integrate with Microsoft Teams for Education app platform. My name's Dominic Williamson and I'm a Senior Program Manager, part of Microsoft Teams. Today's session is for IT professionals managing Microsoft Teams for Education, and for those who are also looking to see how you can create an app for an EDU scenario. I'm going to be focused on 4 key things: an overview of apps for Teams, then how you can manage Teams and apps together in your environment. We're going to look then at starting to customize and extend Teams using apps and the app templates that we have. And last but not least, you'll even get a chance to create your own custom app, no coding required. Let's jump into it. So what are the benefits of using apps in Microsoft Teams? And for anyone administering Office 365, actually one of the big ones is security. Think about how you protect and streamline your identity management. And this is where single sign-on, which is where then apps within Teams can then just use the same organizational identity. That is a huge help to maintaining a manageable set of identities, but also then using things like the Enterprise Mobility Security Suite and all of the automated and proactive monitoring that it can do to help you managing identities within your environment. Also, when we keep apps open and available in Microsoft Teams, it also reduces the chance of shadow IT. And what do I mean by that? Well, we need to be realistic. Educators, students, and staff, there's a lot of apps that they need and want as part of their day-to-day working and learning. And so if we restrict them, if we disable them from being able to do whatever it is that they need as part of their day-to-day workflow, this is where it encourages them to use tools that you don't have the governance and administrative controls over. So one of the best things is by empowering users to access apps within Teams. It means you can then also leverage all of the Office 365 and Microsoft 365 administrative controls. And we also think about then, of course, how it can support learning. This is where we see apps for Microsoft Teams can then integrate and bring in brand new capabilities like rich learning content such as SCORM, XAPI, and more directly within the Teams experience. We've seen apps save educators and teachers time, being able to then use educational services and content as part of their online classes and hybrid learning scenarios. And one of the big ones, of course, is thinking about our students and making sure we can help students focus during their learning experience. And this is again where a team gives a single place for the student to come and have access to all of the materials and all of the content, whether that's within the file section of a team or an educational app, still in the context of a team, allowing students to stay on task, all within a singular place. And then it's also about how we integrate that experience across devices. So meaning that we can then again use our administrative controls, whether our users are using Microsoft Teams and the apps on iOS, Android, PC, Mac, Linux, and of course in the browser with Edge, Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. So Microsoft Teams already has a vibrant ecosystem today, and it's continuously growing with fantastic educational apps like Kahoot, Nearpod, ClickView, Go1, and as well as also not just education-specific apps, but apps that support IT workflows, business workflows, marketing. So if we look at things like Jira, we've got GitHub, Poly, Trello, and hundreds of more experiences that we can then bring into Microsoft Teams. And it's the ability to bring apps into Teams that we see are enhancing learning today. I'll share just 2 quick examples. One is from Newcastle University. We're seeing then Poly, which allows you to do real-time polls and surveys with students. And this is where we can see as an educator real-time feedback seamlessly from my students in the context of a course. Or if we look at City of Westminster College, how they're using the Go1 app to bring in SCORM, XAPI, and other rich learning content packages into Teams. And these are just a few of the examples, and you can find many more as part of the Teams scenario library available if you go to the address flipgrid.com/TeamsEDU. But it's not then just about benefiting our educators and our students by having apps within Teams. This is where it can also save time for you as IT professionals, streamlining workflows around help desk, around project management, around the ability to then bring in all of these apps that we have for developer, DevOps, and support scenarios. And this is where I want to share just one example of what that can look like with ServiceNow and how that's able to then save IT services a lot of time and resources by then using some of also the AI capabilities of Microsoft Teams and ServiceNow.
Perform routine ServiceNow tasks directly in Microsoft Teams with Now Virtual Agent, and help reduce overhead, improve efficiency, and resolve issues faster. Activate the bot by typing hello. Then pick and choose from a list of requests. Users can interact with the bot and receive automatic answers to questions. What happens if they don't get the answer they need? Don't worry, the bot will direct them to external resources or create a support ticket. Free up more time and resources for all your employees with Now Virtual Agent available for Microsoft Teams today.
So one of the core concepts is we've seen some examples of how apps are being used for both teaching, learning, as well as also IT workflows. Well, there are a few different types of apps that you can engage with. And so this is one of the first considerations when it comes to creating apps and then also managing them. We have first-party apps, so those are made by us here at Microsoft across when we think of, say, Office 365, so Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote. These are then being able to embed and have a rich experience within Teams. And then we have an open platform for third-party developers. So these are not built by Microsoft, and these are popular industry apps. So examples from before, such as Nearpod, Kahoot, Trello, and many, many more. And these allow you as administrators to be able to make it easy for your users to embed these apps that they want and need as part of their day-to-day workflow and learning, while also giving you then the governance and controls as an administrator. And then finally, we have the ability for you to create custom apps. So this is where you can create unique workflows for your organization. One of the things I really want to highlight then are the different capabilities that we see within the Microsoft Teams app ecosystem. So this is really giving you the ability to extend your workflow within Teams to suit whatever it is and the experience that you want to deliver to your users. And so this is exactly when we see an app created for Teams. You can think about it a lot like, say, your smartphone. Your smartphone has different capabilities. It might have a camera or a GPS, which helps you with, say, a map app or a photography app. And the same concept is within Teams. Of course, Teams is not a physical phone, but it is a platform that provides capabilities when we see those different capabilities being used together to create meaningful workflows. And so that's when you open an app from, for example, a third-party developer, you'll notice they might use a combination, one or all of these different platform capabilities. One of the first being bots. So the ability to have a conversational interface with an AI chatbot. We can see here, I can ask a question to the bot, what are my tasks today? And it responds, not just with text, but also then rich cards that show me a list that I can interact with, as well as also you can have interactable buttons. So here I can then click view more. We have the option then for what we call tabs. And you can think of this like a full canvas, so a place to host your own unique user interface. And so in this example, we see then a set of tasks, and then it's a project board into then different buckets of activities that need to be completed. And this is then all fully customizable as part of creating an app within Microsoft Teams using that tab canvas user interface. And of course, Teams is a hub for communication and collaboration. And so we see the ability then to communicate effectively is so important, and we can even have apps that further customize and extend that experience. So rather than having to leave the conversation flow, I can actually stay right within my conversation, click on the message extension, and I can search in this example for a task that I want to embed, saving me a lot of time, meaning I don't have to go back to a different app to be able to experience it. I'm bringing capabilities of the app directly in the message space. We also see additional platform capabilities around what we call the activity feed. So again, think of a concept where you want to notify a user or notify some students that they have an assignment due, as an example, or a task is due. This is where apps can then send an activity feed notification to end users. And we also then can start to think about then, how do we have that rich conversational experience? So this is what we call adaptive cards, allow you to take actions in the context of something like a chatbot. And so really one of the core things to keep in mind here is that apps that you use, whether they're third-party apps or looking to create an app yourself, you can then think of them a little bit like different building blocks. You can use just, say, adaptive cards, or you could use adaptive cards and tabs and bots together. It's really up to you and how you want to deliver your experience to your users. And it's one of the things to be aware of when you are using apps in Teams, and that's why you do see different experiences that take advantage of the different platform capabilities. Lastly, we have this idea of personal apps. So one of the things to be aware of is that we can have an app that we work together in the context of a team. So let's think of, say, brainstorming. We all come together and brainstorm ideas. We want everyone to see the same thing. But at other times, we might just want a personal view. For example, the tasks that have been assigned to me, which is really important. And so this is where we have apps for Teams are available both in what we call scope for Teams and channels, as well as in the scope of just personal. And you can have apps that provide both a team scope and a personal scope, or one or the other. But again, it's part of that flexibility that we have with the Teams platform and how we see it being used so effectively then for teaching and learning. And speaking of that, to give an example of how we see video content being effectively used to support the teaching and learning experience, I want to share with you one of the apps called ClickView. What ClickView does is it allows educators to share and students to view high-quality educational videos directly within Teams. And it makes it easy for educators to save time and bring in this rich learning content directly into their course. Now, one of the things that's particularly unique then is also think back to how we saw the different capabilities of Teams. ClickView is a great app that uses multiple different parts of the Teams capabilities to then allow users to engage in many different ways with the app. So if we think about how the app then is provided, we can see examples of it being used to then have a message extension. So directly from within the chat space, I can open up and then ask and search for content, as well as also I can have a tab directly within Teams itself. So let's have a look at how ClickView is using those different capabilities that you saw a preview of a moment ago. So if we go across to my entrepreneurship course, we can see that I have ClickView added as a tab in the team. So you'll notice the value of employee ownership is one of the tabs across the top. And when I click onto it, it immediately is then taking me to that full screen tab view, which is now a video that I can then watch talking about the different key concepts here of employees as part of our entrepreneurship course. But it's not then just a tab. And of course, this tab can become a full screen view, so I can focus on the content here. I'll also go back now to the post space where we can have the conversations in the context of our course. And that's where across the bottom of the screen where it says start a conversation, I can see the message extension. I can see other message extensions as well that can be brought into that space. But what it means is I can bring in a rich interactive experience directly in the conversation space of Teams. Now you'll notice I can go through and we can have the click view. I can search for content libraries. So for example, let's say business value. And this is all bringing this in context within Teams directly to the conversation space as part of that message extension. And before we had the canvas as part of the tab. Now what's so powerful about that is when I click on add, it then adds it, and you'll notice here's one I already prepared a moment ago. Directly within the conversation space, my students can interact with that content. So student, please watch to prepare for our class on Wednesday. And when I click play video, immediately without leaving Teams, I can stay focused and I can then prepare for my class with my educator, Ken, in this example. And this is what we mean around how different apps can take advantage of the different platform capabilities, because that's how the ClickView app is giving you a great experience, both as a full screen tab app, as well as also in the message space using the message extensions. And so those are just two quick examples. So let's talk a little bit now about, we've seen some examples of apps. The idea of an app has different platform capabilities, And we've then started to see how those platform capabilities can be applied to an app. But then administering an institution, how do you use policy to manage the security of the apps within your tenancy? So this is where we have Microsoft Teams policy model, which is really the way to think about it is you have a default policy that of course applies to all users by default, and then you can create custom policy. So what that custom policy can do is, for example, have a separation between the app policy you apply to staff members versus the app policy you apply to students. You might have researchers who need to have access to certain apps compared to other members of staff. What we're providing here is the capability for you to be able to then define policy for either all users or also then apply it per user to be able to then define certain groups of users and what they should have access to within your tenancy. And so this is a really important concept to be aware of. How then do we manage policy and manage apps within Teams? Well, there's a few important things to be aware of, and you can kind of think of it also around certain policies will do things like fundamentally enabling the app for users, while other policies are designed to just make the workflow easier. And again, you can almost think of it, how do you promote certain apps to certain users? And when I say promote, it's again about how do we save time. So let me take you through this idea. We have app policy to do things like managing the apps at the org-wide settings. And so this is actually selecting allow apps or restrict certain apps, and we can then do that for our entire tenant or specific users. Once we've allowed apps to be available, let's take Kahoot as an example, we can then also do app permission policies, which also then further define which users in our tenancy have permission to actually manage and use the app itself. Finally, if we think about things like the app setup policies, this is where we can then customize the Teams experience so that the apps are actually pinned to the navigation bar within Teams. So a great example of that would be saying taking Planner, which is a great app to help people with projects and planning and organizing of tasks. And then, for example, for all of the researchers that would be using this, we could actually pre-pin it within Teams, making it easier for our users. And so an example of what that actually looks like is here on the right-hand side. You'll notice that the left-hand bar of Teams has been customized. You can see things like GitHub, Bitbucket, and this is then examples of how apps using app setup policy have been pinned within Teams, making it easier for our users to be able to view them. So here are the concepts that we just covered, but now going hands-on in the Teams Administrative Center. Remember how I was referring to you can then manage apps across your entire tenant? So we have things like our org-wide settings that I can then set for everyone within the organization, as well as also this allows me to see all of the apps available directly from the Teams App Store, and then I can review things like the publisher, the current version, and notice here where it says certification. This is also a great one I'll come into in a moment, but this can help you with doing things like security reviews, because when I click on the publisher attestation, I can then see important information around things like the security profile, so it allows multi-factor authentication, data handling, and general information as well, which has all been submitted as part of the process for the app to be published. So this is a great tip, which I'll come back to a little bit more. We also have the ability then to set up permission policies. So this is where I can then set permission policies. Of course, we have our default global, which we can change for all users, or we can click add and create new policies. So this is where if I click on my staff apps, I can go ahead and edit. And then it makes it very easy for me to be able to go through and then manage access to the Microsoft apps, to third-party apps available on the App Store, and then also available the custom apps. So this is always a great practice is to allow all apps, but of course, if you do need to ever manage certain apps, you could say allow apps, specific apps, and then, for example, allow apps and then block others. And last but not least, if we go to setup policy, so this is where we have a great capability here. It allows you to then customize that side of Teams. So if I click on edit, and then we can see staff pinned apps. Now, one of the great things is we can then actually pre-install apps. So again, example here would be the Now Virtual Agent. If I wanted to add in another app, so let's go over here and say Go1. we would just search for it and then we can click add. But in the interest of time, we'll just leave it with the Now Virtual Agent, and I'll also pin it to the left-hand side, so it appears then in the view of my end user. Let's switch views to see what that looks like. Here's the view of one of our staff members, Ken, who we've applied the policy to. Notice he receives a message, your admin has updated your settings, some of your pinned apps may have moved, so it goes to the three-dot ellipsis. And now the virtual agent app that we selected to appear here is now available on the left-hand side for Ken to interact with. So making it very easy for Ken to discover the app, and because it's installed, it's already active and waiting to help me as my virtual agent as part of my IT help desk workflow. Now you might be saying, well, how do I review and know which apps are secure to use within my environment? And that's one of the things that we've worked really hard with our app partner ecosystem to provide a clear set of documentation around the app security and compliance. And so this is where you can then review critical information around the app policy and practices. So if we think of, let's just take Poly here as one of the example apps, you can then see which security standards they adhere to, as well as also the type of telemetry gathered. And this is available for the apps across the Teams ecosystem. So this is again where we're providing transparency into the ability for you to be able to review apps within your ecosystem, as well as also making sure that you can make informed decisions. As part of the app submission process, every developer submits the app to Microsoft. We review that to make sure it meets our content and security standards, and then it's available within the App Store. Every app does have then a privacy policy that is associated to the app, meaning there is transparency in the app itself and also where you can find more information. And I would strongly encourage you to search for the Microsoft Teams App Security Compliance page, where again we've made it even easier for IT administrators to be able to do reviews on apps and the types of data they have access to, data handling information, cloud app security information, and much more. So something that is a great tip, an important piece to use as part of any review. So common questions that I get asked a lot. Well, what are the best approach to managing apps? Now the best approach is to allow third-party apps and then review the privacy policies based on usage. And so of course you can then view which apps are being used within your environment. But one thing that is really a best practice here is allowing users to explore the App Store and empowering them to make the decisions of what helps. One of the things where I've seen institutions not go so effectively with their policies, they try to manually review all of the apps in the App Store. And this is very, very time consuming for IT departments. And the reality is, when we think about our educators, our students, they are the ones who know what it is that they're looking to achieve in their courses, in their projects as part of their working. And so by empowering them to be able to use the apps, this is where you can then proactively review the apps that educators are finding and engaging with, rather than trying to work your way through hundreds of apps before and only find that maybe a select number were the ones that you really should have focused the majority of your efforts on. So how do I know what the app does? Well, all developers provide an overview in the App Store posting, as well as also on their website. So this is again where you have a tremendous amount of information, even without leaving Microsoft Teams, as you view the apps from the apps page, as well as also, of course, you can go to any of the developer websites and they provide significant how-to guides, documentation. And so when we think about best practices, Microsoft Teams requires third-party apps to be enabled for the best experience for your institution. So that question of how do I know which apps are being used? Well, this is where we have the ability from within Microsoft Teams. We can go to the app usage reports in the Teams admin portal. And when you go to app analytics and reports, you'll see here on my screen, I can then do an app usage report. I can run it for the period of time that I define, in this example 30 days. You could also do 90 days. And then we'll see here the active users per app within the institution. And so this is again giving me insight into which apps are being used within my environment. And another common question is, how do I monitor and then protect users within my institution? So this is of course where you have one of those benefits I was referring to before, because we're then using things like Azure Active Directory and our identity to be able to do sign-in. This is where I can then see my users within my organization. I can see which apps they are signing into. So I can see here that Ken, for example, has signed into MindMeister as well as also Kahoot. And on the right-hand side, we always then can see the capabilities of then Microsoft security services. And so this is where, when you are using services like Cloud App Security, it's continuously monitoring your environment as well, making sure that your identities are being protected and there's no suspicious behavior within your tenancy itself. And so this is when we think about then using the app reports, using Active Directory to see sign-in. We're now getting a holistic view into our environment of who's using different apps, which apps are being used, or which ones are popular. And it's really now a chance for us to go hands-on and really make the best experience for our users. So let's talk about app templates and how they can make it easy for you to get started with then custom apps within Teams. App templates are open source and allow you to create a differentiated experience within Teams around common business workflows or educational workflows that are unique to your institution. They're designed for minimal configuration and no coding required, but can save you a tremendous amount of time to really improve the experience for your staff and students. And one of the best things of all is they're available because they're open source. You deploy them to your tenancy and to your Azure environment, meaning they are secure and extensible within your environment. So this is where we see a lot of common challenges like booking a room, managing frequently asked questions. How do we support students, particularly if we start to think about online learning? These are what the app templates are designed, is to help you have a solution and to create a better experience without necessarily having to code it from scratch. So the app templates, you can think of them as a library of solutions that are available and getting better over time. And you can see there's a long list on the screen here. I'll just focus on the first two for our session. But really, this is where we start to see app templates are supporting many scenarios across the organization. One of the most important ones for any educational institution, of course, is teaching and learning. And this is where Qbot is a great example of an app template that's available now to really support teaching and learning scenarios through enhancing them with AI. We're seeing it save educator time, improving student outcomes. And so this is where Qbot is available and a great example of an app template coming to life. Let's have a closer look at Qbot, what it can do, and I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of as you're talking to an educator, because this is where it's so important that we provide services and capabilities that help them as part of their day-to-day teaching and creating a great experience for our students. What it does is it learns over time as it's being used in the context of a course from your answers that you mark as correct. And what it can then do, as we can see with Ashley and then a similar question from Rosie, is it can then proactively respond, saving you time and importantly also answering and giving those students their knowledge faster and easier than before. Qbot has a knowledge base that you as a course administrator or organizer can then easily manage over time, making it better and better through a simple user interface. Let's go hands-on with Qbot. Here we are as a student. I simply type @question to start engaging with Qbot when I post my question into my class. And what this will do here is when I ask, what are tax credits? This is actually something that Qbot knows the answer to, and it immediately responds, saving a lot of time for the educator, you running the course, or me as well waiting for an answer as a student. So it helps both people involved. I can ask another question, @question, what is a negative externality? And you'll notice this time around, Qbot doesn't know the answer. However, what it does then is it tags the educators in the course. It could be multiple. In this example, it's Megan. And then it's now waiting to receive the correct response, and then Qbot will learn from that. Now I'm logged in as Megan, who is the educator. And what I'm able to do is also I receive a notification, making it easy for me to manage the questions that I receive in my course. And when I go ahead to the question itself, I can then reply, which is very, very important because we want to make sure that that student doesn't miss this learning opportunity. And so when I click reply, this is where I can then give it the response. And as part of providing the response to my student, this is now where Qbot will learn. So now I've responded to Alex's question, and what I can do is then with Qbot, I can actually, this is where when I select the answer, Qbot will then be able to have a choice of the responses that have been provided to the original question. I, from the dropdown, will click the one that I've just provided here, because this really is the correct answer I want both my student Alex and Qbot to learn from. When I click save, this is actually now going to send that back to the knowledge base, and this is the magic of Qbot coming to life. Because now, if it's asked a same or similar question, Qbot has learnt from this experience and will also save me a lot of time. Here's Qbot now showing how it's learnt from that experience. I'm a completely different student to before, asking a similar question. What are negative externalities? Even though it's worded differently to before, you'll notice Qbot now was able to go through its knowledge base and immediately give Pradeep an answer, helping Pradeep with his learning, but also saving the educator, me in this example, a lot of time. And so this is where Qbot has now been able to respond, even though it's a different channel, a question from a different student, because the question was very similar to before and it had learnt the answer from the educator or whoever else provided as that as the correct answer, it is now able to then support this student in their learning. Qbot also features a tab view, which provides a summary of both the answered and unanswered questions. And this is great for being able to, as a student, learn from the answered questions, and also from an educator to see who has actually been engaging, asking the questions within the context of this course. Finally, Qbot is easy to manage as an educator. The knowledge base is available via a web interface, questions on the left, answers on the right, and then all of the AI services is how Qbot can then look through those questions, understand the different types of way the question could be asked to provide the answer to students, saving you a lot of time. And Qbot can be used across any subject type, where text-based conversations and answers are then a part of it, where we can then see it being applied, where we can even embed links, and of course, however you wanted to provide the answer to your students as part of that Q&A back and forth that we see within the context of the course that we just went through together. App templates are open source, meaning that you can get them from GitHub. So Qbot, of course, being the one that we're just talking about here, to be able to go ahead and download, you would simply follow the documentation. And this has all of the documentation that you need to be able to go through and do the deployment. So just like that, if we go ahead, we can then read the prerequisites, we can read through all of the steps that we need to have that great AI-enhanced teaching and learning app deployed into our tenant with Microsoft Teams using Azure services. So let's have a look at some of the other app templates. So the other app template I'll take you through is FAQ+. Now this is a different type of app. Think about all of the frequently asked questions that we would get as part of the day-to-day, all of the tools and services that staff and students have access to. How do you manage all of the FAQ pages that are typically existing within an institution, but often aren't really used because a user, will have trouble knowing which is the right FAQ page to go to for their frequently asked questions that they might have, and then they have to try and, scroll through multiple pages. So in this regard, FAQ Plus makes that whole process easier and fast. What it does is it allows you to bring in frequently asked questions into a chatbot interface. And if the bot doesn't know the answer, and this is the magic of it, it then asks an expert who can then help make sure that no question goes unanswered. So unlike Qbot, which was designed to be more in the context of a course with teaching, think about this as a great one to be able to then help manage common questions about workflows internally within the institution. So thinking of say student accommodation, or thinking about staff members, how do they have access to some of the different services provided by the institution. And this is where we can then bring them together in the context of a chatbot that you can then manage where the staff or students could ask questions to. Let's have a look at how FAQ Plus works. Here we are in Microsoft Teams, and you'll notice FAQ Plus bot is over on the left-hand side. Because it's open source, you can give it whatever name that you want, give it your own icon, and so this is where we're calling it Help Desk, and this is really designed to help new staff or new students use the tools and services provided by our institution. By going over here and clicking on the left-hand side, this is where now the user can interact with the bot, and it really helps lots of those common questions that come up. In this example, we're using it to also help people use all of the new remote working and remote learning technologies like Microsoft Teams, because there's a lot of questions out there. So this is where, rather than having to try and go through 10, 20 different pages of FAQs, I can come in and ask, how do I start a chat in Teams? And immediately you'll see here it gives me a quick response. How do I create a meeting? And what this is doing is the bot is understanding the question, going back to the knowledge base, and then able to provide a response because it already knows an answer to that. Now, one of the common challenges is, well, what happens if the bot doesn't know an answer? Now, this is the best thing about the plus, is where it can ask an expert if it doesn't know how to respond. So let's say I'm asking something not related to the knowledge base that has already been created, and maybe we're asking, how do I join the How do I join the robotics club? Again, community is such an important part of the education experience, but that's not something that our bot knows the answer to. Of course, maybe you did give it that knowledge. Now I can simply go ahead and ask an expert. And then we'll call this campus clubs. And you'll notice it's even got a bit of intelligence where it actually went back and already took the question from the last statement that was made, and then already pre-filled it in here, which is a great one. And then I can simply go and then ask an expert. So what this is going to do now is this is going to go off to our assigned group of experts who are designed to help the staff or students who request an expert to help them as part of the bot. Let's switch now to one of the experts' views. Here we are now as one of the expert views. You'll see I'm now logged in as Kara, and Kara has access team called FAQ Plus Subject Matter Experts. And what the bot does is makes it really easy to go ahead and then start to see here that question from Megan before, which is how does she join the robotics club? This is where I can go ahead, I can actually change the status and acknowledge it, so I can assign it to me or mark it closed when I'm finished, which I can do just like that. And now we can go ahead and then start a chat with Megan to help her in her journey to understand how to be a more active member as part of the campus life that we provide. So let's go ahead, I'll start a chat with Megan. And you'll notice it immediately then connects me through. So this is where we have already a subject, RE Campus Clubs. You can find a full list of our communities on our campus. And normally you type in the URL, and then just like that, we can go ahead and then send that message back to Megan, and therefore we've been able to answer her question in addition to saving ourselves many other questions that she already asked and the bot knew the answer for. Easy as that. The last best thing about it is the knowledge base is easy to maintain. So this is how FAQ Plus can then immediately respond to student questions or staff questions on any topic that you put in here. We're talking about how to use the digital tools, but this could be campus services, IT processes, you name it. There's a fantastic, easy to use interface where we simply put the question examples on the left-hand side, the correct responses on the right-hand side, and then all of the fantastic AI and cognitive services then help to understand when someone asks a question, what's the right answer to provide. And even better, if I head over to settings, you'll notice I can also add URLs to existing FAQ websites that you have on the internet available, and this is where I can even then pull that information in. So there's two quick examples of the app templates, and there are many more available from aka.ms/Teams app templates. So if we go to the site really quickly, we just type in that link there and click go. We can then come to the list, and as mentioned, there are many more available, so things like insights, attendance, booking a room, and much more. And all we ever need to do is from the app itself, head on over to GitHub, where we'll be able to find all of the documentation that we need to be able to deploy the app into our tenant. Speaking of that concept, it is an important one, the types of apps that we can deploy. So if we head across to installing apps, The key thing to remember here is when it's a third-party app that goes through the Microsoft Store and it is then reviewed by Microsoft, that's when you go to the store and then you can click install. So let's think of, say, ClickView, Go1, ServiceNow as examples of third-party apps available in the Teams App Store itself. And then the app templates that we're talking about now are the ones that you deploy to your tenant. So these do not get submitted to the public store. They are then deployed within your tenant, so your Office 365 environment, and only your users will have access to them. And this is also why the open source app templates allow the ability, because you can go ahead and then customize them before you deploy it. And that's one of the great things about the customization of apps, is where you can then add your own branding, rename it, add your content. And so this is a great way to be able to then use both the app store that we have, as well as also the ability for you to create custom apps within Microsoft Teams. So let's talk about making your own custom apps. And this is different to the app templates. Imagine now you're making something completely new. One of the best things about creating apps for Teams is you can still start no coding required. And this is going to be a great example of think of a scenario where we want to have an app that is a landing point for our staff or students. In my example, I'm going to show you how we're going to create an app that allows staff to see upcoming events. And so this is where all I need is App Studio to begin. And the idea behind this is just to imagine what's possible in a very simple and quick and easy to use custom app that we're about to make together. So to begin, let's open up App Studio in Microsoft Teams. From Teams, head over to Apps on the bottom left-hand side and search for App Studio. You'll notice that it returns as one of the many apps available. Click on it and then click Open. Or in my example, you would click Add. I've already done it before, so that's why I'm going to click Open. And here we can now see immediately App Studio is all about making apps easy to create. There's a chatbot to help you learn how to use different parts of Teams. And the best thing is we can go across and we'll be using mostly the manifest editor. But you'll notice we can also do things like looking at how to create different cards, the control library if you want to make more advanced apps, and more. But we're going to start with a simple yet very, very useful app. And you could imagine that you're going to embed other resources from your institution. But in my example, what I want to do is provide a list of upcoming training events for my staff members. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a web page and I'm going to embed that into Teams. And so you can imagine you're embedding then a resource within your institution. This could be a support page. This could be an announcements and news page that you want your staff members or students to find more easily. In my example, I really want my staff to find a list of upcoming training events because it's so important to make sure we're always building our professional skills. To begin, what I'm going to do is click on Create a New App. From here, we simply need to go through and then fill in all of the fields. So I'm going to call this one Events. Click Generate to give it an app ID. Package name, so this is the name that you want to give it. So I'm going to call it com.contoso. But again, you could use, of course, your institution name as part of this. I'm just giving an example here. Let's give it the version number, version 1.0.0, always a great version number to start with. And then we can put as part of the short description, upcoming training events. And so again, you'd just be giving information, upcoming training events, a list of training for staff with live presenters. Now here we're going to fill in a little bit more information. So who is the developer? Again, in your example, you would put your institution name. I'm just going to put mine, Contoso. Now the website, this is again just website information for your organization. This does not get reviewed by Microsoft because you're deploying this to your environment, but again, it's always important to make sure we're providing clear information for our users so they know what has actually been produced by our institution or not. So I'm just going to go get my organization webpage, paste that one in. And we can also get a few more pieces of information. So if you have like a privacy URL for your staff to be aware of, we're just going to paste that in. And the main thing is, the reason we're of course filling all of these things in is because there is that required asterisk beside these fields, and we can leave some of the other fields blank. For example, partner information, not needed because right now I'm building an app for my organization. Branding. Let's go ahead and add in an icon for our app itself. So we need to have a .png, which is 192 by 192, and another one which is 32 by 32. So I'm going to click update. I already have created, or I should say I already have some icons already to go. So I'm going to add in the icon here and add in my other icon there. As a tip, try to keep the icons with colors that are consistent with teams. So you'll notice on the left-hand side, these are white icons with a transparent background, and you'll notice it works really well when I come back to it a little bit later on. We can then of course also add in like different colors that we want to have for our app. So you can brand this uniquely to your institution. And just like that, we've now filled in everything we need. Now, capabilities. This is something we spoke about before. This is where we can have different capabilities for our app. In my example, we have a tab that we're going to be creating with a list of the upcoming events. But you might want to have a chatbot that you're creating for your staff members, or a connector, which then provides, again, additional information or updates, or maybe message extensions to be able to reference internal resources within your organization. It's totally up to you which of these capabilities that you choose to use. For today, we're going to keep it easy and just start with a tab, just to start to see an example of our first custom app. But over time, you could make this app more rich, more customized, like the types of apps that we see as app templates or as made by third-party developers. I'm going to go here and say add a personal tab, and I'm going to fill this one, and I'm going to call this online events, and make that one word. And we now have the content URL. Now this is very important because of course this is the URL of what we're going to embed. So I'm just going to go over here and take my URL. And of course this would be your URL to whatever resource you want your staff or students to have view as part of this personal tab. And I'm going to click save. There we go. We have now created a personal tab. I could add multiple tabs, so we could have one for events, we could have one for leadership updates, but you can start to imagine how we could then build up this app even more over time. Now we've done step one, we've now done step two, which in this example, we're just going to add a tab to our app. And we're now going to head over to step three, which is finishing. So if you support multiple languages, this is where we could now add in additional information for our other users. Domains and permissions. So imagine if you do have an app, for example, that might require authentication. This is where you can also do things like setting up single sign-on. So if, for example, you are directing users to something that is or does require sign-in, this is how you would be able to make sure you fill in the appropriate areas here. But because in my example, I'm just pointing to a page that is publicly available, I'm not going to need to fill this in today. We can, for anyone who really wants to get into the development side of things, this is of course where you can then start to see the actual JSON of the app manifest itself. Finally, from test and distribute, this is how we can then test the app ourselves and then download the manifest to share this with the users in our tenant. When I go and click on install, if you run into this, which is you don't have permissions, make sure you do go to the admin portal and that you have allowed custom apps. This is a great thing to be able to help, for example, student developers practice their skills with teams, as well as of course for you to be able to create custom app solutions. And you can then set who has access to this from the policy. So in my example, if I go across here, you'll notice if I go to global and I click on edit, The reason I received the error a second ago was because this has been switched off, upload custom apps. So typically this is where if I want, say, other members to be able to create apps, only an administrator of the tenant, so looking actually back to your administrator rights, can upload an app to the tenant. But this would allow users to be able to experiment creating their own apps, but they would still need to go through IT to be able to distribute it throughout the entire tenant itself. Let's have a look at a different user that does have the ability to then use an app and test it themselves. So I've just switched users over to Ken, who has permission to be able to upload a custom app. And this is where I can go and click on install and then add. So this is just side loading the app just for me as the individual, no one else in the tenant, and there we go. We now have our events custom app that we just created, making it easy for staff members to find upcoming events that they can then register for as part of their professional development. And of course, this is just the example. You could have your own page here. This might be your intranet. This could be a whole variety of experiences, but I'm just showing a quick one where professional development is such an important topic, and how can we make it easier for staff members to get some great training. And this is where, of course, Microsoft Education provided lots of fantastic online training. Now, in that regard, how do we then distribute this to all of the users in our environment? Because right now this is working, but it's only right now Ken who has access to it. Well, we go back to App Studio, click on the manifest editor, and then from here, go back to the app, and then where it says test and distribute, we click on download. And what that will do is download the app manifest that we can then share within our environment across all of our users. So this is where I'm actually going to switch back to the administrator for the tenant. So now I've switched back to the tenant administrator, and I've got my app manifest that I've downloaded. If I go over to manage apps, notice how it says upload. When I click on upload, this is where I can then select the file, which is what we just clicked download a moment ago. Click on events. Added events to the list. So this now will appear along with all of the other apps in the App Store. So now give it a few minutes, and what you'll notice is the app will appear in the App Store, but only for our institution, because we have not uploaded this to the public App Store. This was just the App Store for our tenant. So now if I go back over into Teams, go over to Apps, and there it is, Events, the custom app that we've just created. And if I go ahead and now go to the app, click on Add, this would be available here to everyone within the tenant who has the ability to engage with custom apps. So they don't have to be allowed to upload custom apps, but they do need to be allowed to access apps as part of their permission policy. So what do I mean by that? Well, to be able to see all of this fantastic content that we've created within our custom app, I would simply need to make sure that as part of the permission policies, for example, if we go to global, where it says custom apps allowed, so this means that they can go to the custom store. And what's fantastic about this is you'll notice it says built for Contoso, but of course for your institution it would have your organization name there. And so these are apps that are only available for my users. So the last thing that we'll just do, and this part would be optional, but putting into practice what we learned earlier, we really want our staff or students to have access to these upcoming events. So what we're going to do, head over to those setup policies that we created before, and we really want to make our staff members aware of it. So I'm going to go here to my pinned staff apps policy that I have created, and of course, it's whatever name that you give it. And I'm going to now add in the custom app that we just created called Events. Click Add. And we're also going to make sure that stays as one of the apps that's pinned on the left-hand side. So it's going to make it really easy for those users with this policy assigned to view the apps like ServiceNow Agent, and then also some of the training events that are coming up. Clicking save. Just give it a little bit of time to apply to your users. So it might take a few minutes or up to an hour or more for it to apply to all users if you're part of a large institution. And that brings it all together. Coming back one last time to one of our staff members who has that policy applied. Now we see both the Now virtual agent and that events custom app that we just made all appearing here as part of the navigation within Teams, using some of our custom apps, third-party apps, and of course the first-party experiences within Teams itself. One thing to always keep in mind is, of course, there is a whole bunch of great training built into Teams. If you click on Help, you'll notice we have training built in under the Training tab. So this is really where make sure you direct people to the existing training within Teams, and if you are making custom apps focused on other training materials, that there's a clear difference between the two, of course. Otherwise, it's even better to make custom apps that focus on other aspects of your institution. But this was just a quick one as the example as part of today. That brings us to the end of our session for today. Well done on going through and hopefully even making your first app for Teams. We've covered a lot together. We did an overview of apps and how they're used within Microsoft Teams for Education. We looked then about how you can use policy to manage your environment, how we can then start to customize and extend Teams using then the open source app templates. And then finally, even how to create your own custom app using App Studio, no coding required to get started. To share a few resources to finish up the session today, we have, of course, the App Templates website. So visiting just the URL on your webpage, or I should say on the screen in front of you, type in the aka.ms. Then we also have the EDU webinars. So again, follow the link on the screen. And the great thing about that is there's also tracks for educators. And then lastly, for everything we covered regarding the app platform and much more documentation and samples, head across to aka.ms/Teams platform. My name's Dominic. Thank you so much for joining me for the session and hope you have a great rest of your day.